Okay. Well, good evening, everyone, and welcome to Hosanna Fellowship. Tonight we're continuing in our study through the book of Genesis as we've come to the 26th chapter. Now, in this 26th chapter, we're going to see that the transition has taken place. Abraham has passed on, and he passed on the baton to the next generation, so to speak. And now Isaac, his son, the son of promise, is the leader of the clan. So, as I said, Abraham has passed on. The transition has taken place. Now Isaac is the patriarch. Isaac has been blessed with two sons. The sibling rivalry began in the womb. Esau is a worldly, adventurous kind of a guy, and Jacob is pretty much a homebody. And we talked about how from a very early age a child's personality is going to be developing and going to show, and traits that will be with them for the rest of their lives are going to show up right from the womb. We mentioned how a woman, when she's carrying her child, is getting to know that little guy or gal, and their personality is being developed even in the womb. The mother's going to know the things that baby likes, because that's what's going to guide her cravings for the different foods that baby at least thinks he wants. And sometimes he gets a little confused as to what delectable delights he might be wanting. So mama will come up with a sardine sundae or something along these lines, because that's what baby thinks he wants. But, well, of course, not everybody gets that strange, but women can desire different things when they're with child. And a lot of that is what the child is wanting. Now, I related to the young men, these boys, and how their personality was there, and how I saw that in my own sons. And Tim, I didn't really mention him last week. We mentioned Robert and Arthur, but Tim, he is our outdoorsman. This guy, he got involved with the Scouts before they lost their moral compass. And once they did lose their moral compass, we transferred over to Trail Life. And that Trail Life group that he got involved in was pretty radical. Every year they would go up to these peaks above Silverton, Colorado there, 13,000 feet high. And they'd go in backpacking, carrying everything they needed for this venture. They'd be living on the fish that they caught and leaving the area in better shape than they found it, and also involved in the fishing up there was a hike, as they would fish one lake and hike down to the next, spend the night in the trees, in hammocks and bivvies, little things like that they could backpack in, making sure that they picked up all their waste and anything else they found. And as they came down the hill, they would wind up doing a 40-mile hike. 40 miles they would walk down and come out at Vallecito Lake. And it was pretty intense stuff. Now, I got altitude sickness just going up to the crest the last time. So there's no way I could go to that 13,000 foot peak, but still, to support the gang, I would be camping out, holding down a base camp down at Vallecito while they were up there for a week, 10 days, living off of nature, basically. So yeah, he is our outdoorsman. When it comes to camping, tying knots, that sort of thing, Timothy's pretty good at that stuff. All three of the boys, along with Dad, happen to like fishing. Don't know how that happened, but we have had a few adventures out there catching different kinds of fish. I haven't been able to take Tim out on the ocean ever, but I was able to take Robert and Arthur out on the ocean and do some deep sea fishing, and they loved it, and we all loved catching trout and whatever else we could go out and catch in this area. But anyway, the boys all have their personalities, and that's the way it is with every person. We are all unique. We may, in some cases, even look the same, but our personalities are going to be different. We could see that with identical twins, and even identical twins are going to be different in some ways, and you'll be able to tell them apart, maybe not by their looks, but by the way they act and the way they talk, the things that they say. So each of us is unique, part of that tapestry that God has been weaving. Each of us unique as a snowflake is unique. There's no two snowflakes alike. There's no two human beings that are exactly alike either. So the boys are different, and but they are a blessing to Isaac. And he's down in the area of Beersheba. We talked about that before. Or Bir Lahai Roy, where Hagar and Ishmael went to. And Bir Lahai Roy means the well of him who sees me. So now they're down in that southern area of Israel, the Negev. And let's go before the Lord. Excuse me, I've got a little congestion tonight. But let's go before the Lord and dedicate our study to Him and get to the reading. Father, we thank you for this evening, this night, even with the cold front moving in as the weather is changing tremendously, and looks like it's going to be pretty cold tonight and tomorrow, with highs about almost 20 degrees lower than they were today, I guess. But Lord, help us to appreciate even the changes in the weather. We wouldn't know what bad weather is if it wasn't for the good. We wouldn't know the good if it wasn't for the bad. But you nonetheless have provided so tremendously for us, Lord, as we, on the coldest of nights, have a nice warm roof over our heads and nice warm blankets to wrap ourselves in. Just everything that, every creature comfort imaginable that you've allowed us to develop and enjoy. Lord, help us to appreciate the things that you give us, the blessings that you bring, and understand that you are the giver of all good things, that we wouldn't have the understanding of how to accomplish anything if it wasn't for your loving touch in our lives. Help us, Father, to truly appreciate you and see the lessons that you have for us as you are bringing us along on the journey that you are calling us to, that journey that will end in your presence, Father, when you call us home. In Jesus' name, amen. Chapter 26, that is, verse 1. There was a famine in the land, besides the first famine that was in the days of Abraham. And Isaac went to Abimelech, king of the Philistines, and Gerar. So famines, they happen from time to time, and there's different kinds of famines. When we go a little further and see the story of Jacob and his sons, we're going to see another famine come along in his days. And they call it famine because the staples are missing. And in that case, Jacob is going to go down to Egypt to get wheat, or he's going to send his boys down to do that. Because the wheat, the barley, the grains are missing in Israel and Canaan. But they're available thanks to Joseph's wisdom down in Egypt. So when these famines come, people will have to go to where they can take care of things. At least they did in those days, where they could get the things that they need, those staples. Now for Isaac, he was well-to-do. He inherited all the riches from Abraham, and he had a lot of livestock. But this famine could have been a famine of the grasses for his livestock. So he has to go somewhere where he could get those grasses for his livestock to graze. In Jacob's famine, we're going to see that they were lacking the commodities, but yet they had some delightful things. They had almonds and honey and some good things that they could send down to Egypt to trade with. But in this case, this famine, whatever it was of, Isaac moves on to the area of Gerar and into the land that is ruled by Abimelech. Abimelech is a title. It means father king. And he was a Philistine, and that was the title for their overall ruler. The Philistines started off in Egypt, actually. It was one of Mitzrayim's sons. Mitzrayim is Egypt. And the Kaptorim and the Kasluhim came from the Egyptians. They went out to an island in the Mediterranean there, and after staying a little while, they came to the coast of Israel, the Mediterranean coast, and they settled in the 5 cities, like in the shape of a crescent, on the coast of Israel, which will be seen. But famines come and famines go, and believers are not immune to adversity. When a famine comes upon the land, whether you're a believer or not, you may have to tighten your belt a little bit. We see when adversity comes, when tragedies, disasters come, that the Christians, the believers, are not immune. As we see what's happening in California, the fires, they don't know if this is a Christian home or a pagan home or whatever. And that fire is going to consume whatever is in its path. And this last round of fires has been so devastating. At one point they measured the consumption of area under the fire to be like a football field per second. It's just unimaginable. Even if you're looking at it, you can't grasp the scope of the devastation from these fires. When a war comes upon the land, the enemy is going to come. Now, it might be that an enemy believes this area is of a certain religion, and that's why they're coming against them. At least that's what it used to be like, as we saw many a religious war throughout history. And in that case, yeah, there's going to be believers and non-believers, and they're going to be conflicting. But in all too many cases, when adversity comes, it's not discriminating between a believer and a non-believer. But nonetheless, an empty stomach is a great motivator. That empty stomach is what moved Abraham to see Abimelech when the famine came in his days. And now we see that Isaac is following suit. A famine comes on the land, and he's going to the same area, to the Philistines. Abimelech being the title of their king. And this famine causes Isaac to move. Just like we're going to see later on that Jacob, his empty stomach motivates him to go down to Egypt eventually. And he's kind of stubborn about it, but the Lord keeps working on him until he does what the Lord wants him to do. So Isaac doesn't move real far on this particular move. This is a map of the area, and the map we had last time shows the Dead Sea there, but it didn't show Gerar. But if you look to the west of the Dead Sea, up above the place where it says Arabah, and to the north and to the west of the Arabah is Beersheba. And if you go a little bit north and west of that, on this map you can see Gerar. And if you go all the way to the coast, there is Gaza. Gaza, we still see a lot going on in that area today as Hezbollah, well, the PLO, Hamas actually, Hezbollah is from the Iranians up north, but Hamas is there in Gaza, and that's where they start launching all their rockets from into Israel. Still today, there's problems in that area. But Gaza was one of the Philistine cities. There's Ashkelon, Eglon, there's 5 of them, Gath, and Ashdod. So it doesn't move real far. It's at about 25, 30 miles. And as we go through our studies, when we're studying David, we're going to see that when he's running from Saul, he winds up going in this area as well, because Ziklag, that becomes his center of operations, is right about the same place as Gerar. Excuse me. Verse 2. Then the Lord appeared to him and said, "Do not go down to Egypt. Live in the land of which I shall tell you. Dwell in this land, and I will be with you and bless you. For to you and your descendants I give all these lands, and I will perform the oath which I swore to Abraham your father, and I will make your descendants multiply as the stars of heaven. I will give to your descendants all these lands, and in your seed all the nations of the earth shall be blessed, because Abraham obeyed my voice and kept my charge, my commandments, my statutes, and my laws." So God motivates his followers through promises. He motivated them through adversity, but he also motivates through promises. Isaac is told not to go down to Egypt. And God repeats the promises that he made to Abraham. Through Isaac there will be many descendants. He will have a land, and there will be a blessing for all of mankind. This is the promise that he made to Abraham, and now the promise is passing on to Isaac, the son of the promise. And really, there wasn't anyone else that it could go to, because he promised that it would be through Sarah that the descendants would be called as well. So Isaac is the only child that was an offspring of Abraham and Sarah. So the other children of Abraham, Ishmael, and the sons of Keturah, are also going to be coming into play as we go through the scriptures here. Their descendants are. But Isaac was the son of promise, and God repeats to him that promise. The promise is because of Abraham's obedience. So that's the thing about families and churches and things. The first generation struggles and finally wins those victories, okay? Abraham struggled a lot, and he finally won the victory because of God working in him. You know, remember that whole process of sanctification that we talked about in Abraham's life, where he had his lapses in faith, his failures along the way, but eventually became the father of the faith. So he won that victory. And now, because he had all the struggles and won the victory, it's passed on to his son. Now Isaac is going to have some struggles, but by comparison, it's pretty easy compared to Abraham. And that's the way it is the next generation doesn't have to struggle so much. And we see that in our own land, in the United States. Our forefathers, when they established everything, they struggled greatly in that Revolutionary War. And then things settled down somewhat as we were trying to get settled and stabilized. But it's been the situation that about every 20 years there's been some kind of a war, some kind of a conflagration that gets us sucked into it right from the beginning there, until the War of 1812, having to fight the Barbary Coast pirates back in 1801, and moving along to within 80 years winding up in a civil war of our own here in the United States. But it's like after the adversity, after the struggle, after things are won, the next generation usually has things a little better, but then again, it'll shift, and along those lines, eventually somebody's got to win that struggle again. And today is Veterans Day. I probably should have mentioned that a little earlier in the introduction here. But, we have learned in this nation that freedom is never free. And each generation has to either win it for themselves or maintain it for themselves. And if we let it go, it may not ever be won again. And there'll certainly be a struggle to get that freedom again. So verse 6. So Isaac dwelt in Gerar, and the men of the place asked about his wife, and he said, "She is my sister." For he was afraid to say, "She is my wife," because he thought, lest the men of the place kill me for Rebekah, because she is beautiful to behold. Now it came to pass, when he had been there a long time, that Abimelech, king of the Philistines, looked through a window and saw, and there was Isaac showing endearment to Rebekah, his wife. Then Abimelech called Isaac and said, "Quite obviously she is your wife, so how could you say she is my sister?" Isaac said to him, "Because I said, lest I die on account of her." So God humiliates a liar. Isaac telling that little white lie. And we talked about what happens with those little white lies and how we don't really know the full extent of our sin, our missing the mark. We don't know how far-reaching that's going to be, and we may think it's nothing, and it could wind up something terrible. And I gave the example of David giving the little white lie to the priests at Nob, and thinking he just wants to get a weapon, a little food, and move along. Doesn't want to be all involved in giving all the history, because he's kind of in a hurry. But the results of that were, in the very next chapter, 85 priests with their families and even their livestock destroyed and their houses burnt down. A little white lie, and it can bring such devastating circumstances and consequences. So Isaac lies about Rebekah being his wife. It's the same lie that his dad used, and we talked about that in that study about a lapse in faith. Because indeed, Abraham had that lapse in faith. And for the same reason, fear of being killed in order that they could steal away the beautiful woman, his wife. And evidently she was a beautiful woman. And we saw that with Sarah. She maintained her beauty into advanced years. And she finally bore a child at the age of 90. But they were talking about her beauty, and the surrounding tribes talking about bringing her into the harem when she was well into her 70s. So Rebekah evidently is also a beautiful woman, and we saw that when we met her at the well, when the servant, Abraham's servant, went there, and he said, as soon as he saw her, that she was a beautiful girl. So Isaac is afraid that because she is a beautiful girl, they'll kill him in order to take her. But the truth comes to light, and it always does. Truth will always come to the forefront. It might take a while. You might have to dig a little bit, but the truth is finally going to come to the forefront. And it could be quite a devastating thing when it does, depending on how deep the lie has gone and how deep it's been buried. But it will come to the forefront, if not in this life, for sure, before the great white throne. If a person has not given their life to Jesus, at that time, all the books are going to be opened, and every rotten, no good deed that each person has done that isn't brought under the blood is going to be recounted. And if you're trying to stand there in your own righteousness, you will bear the price of sin yourself. So, the truth will come in its time. And Isaac admits his fear. I was afraid that you'd kill me because my wife is beautiful and you want to take her. Verse 10. And Abimelech said, "What is this you have done to us? One of the people might soon have lain with your wife, and you would have brought guilt on us." So Abimelech charged all his people, saying, "He who touches this man or his wife shall surely be put to death." So immorality devastates. The morality of the neighboring Philistine culture, or the lack thereof, the immorality might have been a better way to state it. They evidently thought that if one isn't married, anything goes. an awful lot like our culture today. Oh, you're not married, then you're not cheating on anyone. Well, that's not exactly the case. Because you're cheating on yourself. You're cheating on your future spouse. And worst of all, you're cheating against God, who has told you that you're not supposed to have sex outside of marriage. But they evidently thought, well, this is a victimless crime, a victimless sin. Who's being hurt? As long as you're not married, you can do whatever you want. So, the morality that they practiced was far different from the morality of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, and the Jewish people, the Jewish line. So Abimelech doesn't want to bring problems upon him. He probably heard about how his predecessor had problems in his home at the time of Abraham because they had actually taken Sarah into the household. He hadn't had physical relations with her yet, but he knew that something was wrong, that all of the wombs in his home, and in fact the wombs of his livestock, were sealed because of this indiscretion. And so Abimelech doesn't want to suffer the same sort of consequences. Different Abimelech, okay? That's how we know that Abimelech is a title for the king. But this is probably not the same Abimelech that was at the time of Abraham. So this Abimelech the younger, who knows what number he went by, but he doesn't want to suffer the same consequences, so he issues an order of protection to take care of Isaac and Rebekah. Verse 12. Then Isaac sowed in that land and reaped in the same year 100-fold, and the Lord blessed him. The man began to prosper and continued prospering until he became very prosperous, for he had possessions of flocks and possessions of herds and a great number of servants. So the Philistines envied him. Now the Philistines had stopped up all the wells which his father's servants had dug in the days of Abraham his father, and they had filled them with earth. And Abimelech said to Isaac, "Go away from us, for you are much mightier than we." So now God motivates through bounty. He motivates in different ways, sometimes through adversity, through promise, and now we see that he's motivating through bounty. Isaac is blessed with a bountiful crop, 100-fold. That's an amazing thing. That's like you sow 1 bushel of wheat seed and you get back 100 bushels from that plot that you sowed it in, that you planted it in. So you do 40 acres and cover it all properly and you get all that grain back. That's a lot of wheat, a lot of grain, whatever it was he had planted. Maybe it was a mixture, wheat in this field and barley in that one. But he had a lot of grain, 100-fold, 100 bushels back for every bushel that he planted. So the Philistines get jealous. And the Philistines had stopped up the wells that Abraham had dug. Let that one sink into you for a little while. They had stopped up the wells. What sense does that make in the desert? Down here in the Negev, in this desert, an arid land, someone is able to find a place to dig and find water. And with water, you can make anything grow in that land. And they saw the prosperity that Abraham had enjoyed because of that water that he was using from these wells. And yet, they bury the wells. They stop them up. They fill them with dirt. What sense does that make? And it's a crazy thing, but we've seen it even up into modern times. Before 1948, when the Jewish people came back into the land, before Israel had become a nation again, there was nothing but swamps and deserts. Now, when the Israelis came back into the land, it was a very difficult thing. A lot of people died from malaria and other diseases as they were draining the swamps and watering the deserts. And they converted those swamps and deserts into gardens. And we know that in the ancient times, they had converted the desert into gardens. But the people groups that surround them, they do the exact opposite. They convert gardens into deserts and swamps. Stopping up the wells makes no sense in my mind. But that's what they did. And now, because he's got a bountiful crop, they get all jealous about it, as if they don't understand that they could have done the same thing. They could have planted and gotten a crop. Maybe they wouldn't have been blessed as greatly as Isaac was, but they could certainly have planted crops. Instead, they're stopping up the wells. So the Philistines drive Isaac away from where he was there. They didn't drive him too far. He's still in the area of Gerar. Then Isaac departed from there and pitched his tent in the valley of Gerar and dwelt there. See? He's still in that area. And Isaac dug again the wells of water, which they had dug in the days of Abraham his father, for the Philistines had stopped them up after the death of Abraham. He called them by the names which his father had called them. So here we go with that struggle that I was just mentioning. The Philistines, the pagans in that area, stopping up the wells that Abraham had dug. And now Isaac comes along and says, hey, look, we need the water here. We need water for our livestock. We want to plant some crops. Let's dig them wells back up. And he's even naming them the same names that the wells had when Abraham had dug them. So adversity can motivate. This is what's moving Isaac along. The mob rule. Hey, get out of here. So Isaac reopens the wells his father had dug, and he gives the wells the same names that they had before. Verse 19. Also, Isaac's servants dug in the valley and found a well of running water there. But the herdsmen of Gerar quarreled with Isaac's herdsmen, saying, the water is ours. So he called the name of the well Esek, because they quarreled with him. Then they dug another well, and they quarreled over that one also. So he called its name Sitnah. And he moved from there and dug another well, and they did not quarrel over it, so he called its name Rehoboth, because he said, "For now the Lord has made room for us, and we shall be fruitful in the land." So they're digging up the wells, and after they dig a couple up, the Philistines come and fight with them, saying, "That's our water," when they had stopped it up in the first place. And because of the quarrel, Esek means to quarrel, and Sitnah means contention, or something along those lines. Both names indicate that there was controversy over the wells. And when they finally get to this other spot, it's named Rehoboth because there is no quarreling. It means wide open spaces, or, well, something along those lines also, Rehoboth. So now they have a place where they can stay, a place that's big enough for them to have their livestock and maybe plant a crop or two. And now they have water as well, since they're not fighting over the water in this well. So contention can motivate, as we saw. That's what moved them along from place to place, and finally to Rehoboth, where there is no contention. The Philistines contended over the wells that he reopened, and finally they moved to a place where there is no contention. They settled in this place of peace, at least relative peace. Verse 23. Then he went up from there to Beersheba, and the Lord appeared to him the same night and said, "I am the God of your father Abraham. Do not fear, for I am with you. I will bless you and multiply your descendants for my servant Abraham's sake." So he built an altar there and called on the name of the Lord, and he pitched his tent there, and there Isaac's servants dug a well. Well, these guys must have gotten tired of shoving. They're digging all the time here. But God placates the believer. He gives him comfort. Isaac moves to Beersheba, well of the old. God comforts him there. And God repeats the promise of many descendants. And they dig another well, or really unstop the well that Abraham had dug in the first place. Remember, Beersheba means well of the oath. And that was where Abraham had made a pact, a peace treaty with the Philistines, with the Abimelech of his day. And he had set the 7 ewe lambs apart. And Sheba means oath, or it can also mean 7. So this was sealed, and the gift of 7 lambs indicating the oath was established. And now they're down back in that same area, Beersheba, the well of 7, well of the oath. Verse 26, then Abimelech came to him from Gerar with Husath, one of his friends, and Phicol, the commander of his army. And Isaac said to them, "Why have you come to me, since you hate me and have sent me away from you?" But they said, "We have certainly seen that the Lord is with you." So we said, "Let there now be an oath between us, between you and us, and let us make a covenant with you, that you will do us no harm, since we have not touched you, and since we have done nothing to you but good, and have sent you away in peace. You are now the blessed of the Lord." So they're recognizing that he is the one that is the blessed of the Lord. And they have done him no harm. There's been no contention. Yet, haven't we just read that every time they dug a well, there was contention over the well? And that there's contention to move them along in the first place? But They've done no harm. Remember when Abraham made his pact with the Abimelech of his day, and he wanted him to treat him as good as he had treated Abraham. And Abraham probably thought, well, that's easy to do. You haven't treated me very well. So anyway, we're in the same kind of a situation. Something went wrong here. Let's see. Same kind of situation. These guys are claiming that they've never done him anything but good, even though there's been all this contention. So, let's see, is this going to act right? Okay, right. So, they come to make the peace treaty, and Phicol, the commander of his army, that's another title. We're going to see years later another Phicol. It's like a title like general. And Huzath was just his friend. So this is a friend of the king Abimelech, father king. That's what the name means. So now they're talking about how they have sent them away in peace and done them nothing but good. Now envy motivates a deal. It's because Abimelech is jealous. Abimelech and all his people and his friend and even the general of his army here. So Abimelech brings an entourage seeking a peace treaty. Isaac, it seems, a bit skeptical. Why have you come to me? You hate me. But they're envious of the blessings God is giving Isaac. And they say that they have only done him good. But envious of the blessings that God gives to his child, to his follower, the believer. We see that a lot throughout the scriptures, and we see it a lot in our society today. When God blesses someone, there are plenty of people who are envious of that blessing. They want that same kind of a blessing. But they don't want it enough to give their life to the Lord and find that blessing on their own. No, they want to share in the blessing, but not share in the relationship that is necessary. And that's the way it is with these Philistines. They're not about to give up their paganism. And they're not about to give up the things that they're doing. But they see that God is blessing him. And because God is blessing Isaac, they don't want him to come against them, to hire up mercenaries and army and wipe them out. They don't want to, they do want to trade with him. And they want to enjoy the prosperity that comes from those blessings that God has given him. They want the benefit without doing the work. So he made them a feast, and they ate and drank. Then they arose early in the morning and swore an oath with one another, and Isaac sent them away, and they departed from him in peace. It came to pass the same day that Isaac's servants came and told him about the well which they had dug, and said to him, "We have found water." So he called it Sheba. Therefore, the name of the city is Beersheba to this day, Beersheba. So again, they finally found the spot where Abraham had found the well before, was probably what happened. And they dig and reestablished the well, and even gave it back the name that Abraham had given it, Well of the Oath, or Well of Seven. And it's down there in the Negev as well. In fact, we saw Beersheba on the map. So he's back down in that area, pretty close to where he started from in Beersheba. That he went back that 25 odd miles to the southeast and right back to where he started from. But everyone celebrates peace. That's always the case. When we have peace, it's a major celebration. Even when we just see the ending of hostility. And we've seen it back 11:11 at 11 in the morning, the 11th hour of the 11th day of the 11th month, was when the armistice ending World War I was signed in 1918. And there was a great celebration as finally the war to end all wars had come to an end, and there was a worldwide peace after this worldwide war. And that peace lasted a little while, about 24 years? Well, probably less than that, because it was in the 30s, the mid-30s, when Hitler was on the rise and peace was being destroyed throughout the world again, but we were holding back, not wanting to get involved in it until 1941, December 7th, 1941, a day that will live in infamy. When the Japanese attacked us at Pearl Harbor, ending that peace that resulted after the war to end all wars, and lo and behold, we were once again embroiled in a worldwide conflagration, another war to end all wars. But everyone celebrates peace. We celebrated peace at the end of World War II. But it didn't last terribly long either, as soon we were embroiled in a conflict in Korea, followed by Vietnam. Wars rising up every 20 years or so, as the enemy, Satan, hates for anyone to enjoy freedom. He wants us in bondage to tyrannical governments, to onerous taxes, but most of all, he wants us in bondage to sin, because that's when he has control over everyone, when they are in that total bondage. So he hates freedom. And that's one reason that every time we turn around, we see our freedoms being threatened again and again and again. Why every generation must secure that freedom one way or another, because freedom is never free. And if we're going to enjoy it, we must pay the price. So everyone is celebrating the peace that results in this instance. The peace treaty is established. They celebrate it with a banquet. And then they reopen the well and name the place Beersheba, the well of the oath. Verse 34. When Esau was 40 years old, he took as wives Judith, the daughter of Beeri, the Hittite, and Basemath, the daughter of Elon the Hittite. And they were a grief of mind to Isaac and Rebekah. Peace doesn't last very long sometimes. Yeah, the assault from without is over, but now we see the internal turmoil in the family because a lack of discretion motivates to sin. Esau, demonstrating a lack of discretion, choosing wives from the daughters of the land, Hittite women. And this is a prelude to coming events, because these girls are a grief to Isaac and Rebekah. It's a heartbreak for a believer when their son or daughter takes up with a non-believer. Is extremely sad. All too often, rather than leading the unbeliever to the Lord, they are dragged down into the pit of sin. And that's what happened with Esau. The practices of these pagans are a grief of mind to a believer. Practice of the pagans. And we see these practices creeping into the church over long periods of time. It gets worse and worse and worse. The longer a work is around, the more chance for the things of the world to creep in and through compromise water down that work that was established to honor God. It's the life cycle of a church, and we've talked about that before, where eventually you wind up with these big buildings that people are trying to keep up, and everything is just in a maintenance kind of a status. It's seeker friendly, taking in the things of the world, trying to relate to the world. But it's a backwards attitude. If it's the same as the world, why bother going in there? This is why God chooses to use new wineskins and not put new wine into an old, dead wineskin. So, with that, we're going to wrap it up for tonight, and we'll take it up next week as we see more of a contention in the family, that sibling rivalry rising to a feverish pitch. Father, we thank you for your word, for the lessons that you give us. Pray, Lord, that you would help us to take these lessons to heart, to understand who you are, what you're like, and understand the love that you have for each of us, Lord. Help us to understand also your righteousness, to understand that your righteousness cannot bear sin, and that the price of sin must be paid. Lord, help us to also understand that the price of sin has been paid, because Jesus paid it all. And we owe all to him for paying that price of our sins. Help us, Lord, to claim that redemption that you have made possible, that we might be reconciled to you. In Jesus' precious name, amen.